I'm going to kick off here by introducing the natural antidepressant system, and I'm going to start with a purpose statement. And the purpose statement is this: that we are here, this webinar is devoted to helping us deal with dips, and either our own dips or helping other people deal with theirs. And we're going to be looking at what helps us climb out, what helps us prevent dips as well, that when we have those dips in mood, dips in confidence, dips in energy, what helps us climb out from those low places. And so introducing the natural antidepressant as a system involving three key elements. And the first of those is our natural resilience and self-healing ability. And I think if you scratch yourself or you have a bruise, some weeks later that bruise or that scratch will have healed. We have an inbuilt self-healing ability, and we have something similar in the psychological domain as well, that if you have a setback, you have a low patch, that we have a kind of inbuilt bounce back ability. And I'm always encouraged whenever I see a toddler learning to walk, because they're really great examples of this, that you see a toddler learning to walk, they fall over and then they get up, and they fall over and then they get up, and it's as though that ability to recover from setbacks, to the kind of unstoppability of life really, is there hardwired into our DNA. It's part of us, and we all have that natural resilience, though not always as much as we'd like. And that's really why we're here, because the second element in our natural antidepressant system, as well as our kind of background resilience, is also learned resilience, particularly drawing on a toolkit of strategies, strengths, resources and insights that we can use to cultivate and express our resilience. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on. It's the big part of my work and Miriam's work, is training people in strategies, cultivation of strengths, resources and insights that guide us in a way that helps us grow our natural resilience. But you can have an inbuilt resilience, you can have a great toolkit, but what really makes it work is using it. And so that's the third element. The third element are steps we take each day. And so I sometimes remind myself with that, I say, have I taken my natural antidepressant today? And what I'm meaning by that is, have I taken a step or taken some steps that act to nourish and cultivate emotional well-being? And so we're going to be looking at how you take those steps, but more importantly, we can have the lists of things we should do, but it's also how we motivate ourselves to implement taking those steps. And that's really where having some kind of system really makes a difference. So in summary there, here are these three elements: that we have our natural resilience, a self-help, self-healing ability hardwired into our DNA. We have this self-help toolkit of strategies, strengths, resources and insights that we can apply. And those letters, S, S, R, I, they're commonly associated with antidepressants. The commonest group of antidepressants, medical pharmacological antidepressants, are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, commonly known as the SSRIs. And I intentionally use those letters here really to emphasize that actions we take and choices we make also have antidepressant effect. And it's when we take those steps each day, that's really where it kicks in. And that's why the motto of this approach is, the natural antidepressant is something you do. So let's kind of just reflect on that. The natural antidepressant is something you do. And in terms of guiding us, how do we know what steps to take? I want to introduce a practical tool. I really want to have a take home from this webinar, and this is one inviting you to use now. And in this practical tool, it's based on an image, and it's an image I learnt about over 30 years ago when I was a medical student in London. I went to a talk by a pioneer of the holistic approach, Professor Patrick Pietroni, and he talked about health, well-being is a bit like rowing along in a little boat, and we have times where we're rowing along merrily, but we also have times when we crash. And the crashing into a rock, that was really a metaphor for a kind of health problem, and in this case we're going to be using it as a crashing into the rock of low mood, crashing into a rock of a deep dip, depressive episode, but it could be any kind of problem really. And one approach is to focus on the rock and find someone to help you deal with it, and it's a very important approach. And I felt my background in medicine and mental health was really a bit like teaching me to be a geologist, that I got to learn all about the rocks that people crash into. But what Patrick Petroni said is, he said the rock's only half the story, because as well as the rock, there's the water level, and when you raise the water level, you may float over rocks that when you're at a low ebb you would crash into. And so we can use this water level as a metaphor in different ways. You can think of it as your background level of mood. You know, there are things that cause your mood to fall, things that cause your moods to rise. You can also use it to represent your emotional well-being, which is related to mood, though they're not quite the same. Or you could use it to represent your resilience, that when your resilience is at a low ebb, you're more likely to crash into a rock. But the kind of trainings that we do to help people raise their resilience gives you a protective effect. And that's really what we're looking at here, that you can learn to understand more about what are some of the downward arrows and what are some of the upward arrows. And when we look at happiness training or positive psychology foundations, what we're doing is training ourselves to be more aware of, more skillful in the use of upward arrows, and that the downward arrows are like the risk factors, things that increase our chances of getting depressed in this case, or the triggers as well. The triggers are things that push us into lower mood. But it's not just about risk factors and triggers. There are also upward arrows of protective factors. And when your upward arrows are very well developed, they act as a buffer that help protect you from some of the triggers and risk factors that would pull your mood down. So that's really what we're looking at with happiness training. We're looking at how you strengthen the upward arrow. And so that's where it helps to look at it in more detail and to identify it as a tool kit of these 4 different categories, that there's strategies, strengths, resources and insights. Each of those is a different type of upward arrow. And the training helps the natural antidepressant system by helping you develop each of these 4 elements, each of these 4 categories or compartments in your SSRI, self-help SSRI toolkit. So I'd like to ask you, listening to this now, just to take part in a simple exercise where, if you've got a bit of paper, just draw a line, horizontal line, which represents your water level of well-being. And then thinking for yourself, are there any factors happening in my life right now that push that water level down? If that water level is my emotional well-being, or it could be my mood, what are some of the downward arrows, the things that push my mood down, things that may act as either triggers or risk factors for low mood, for those dip times? But also, what do you bring to bear against that? What protective factors or helping factors, what upward arrows do you have? Because in terms of training, a great place to start is by looking at what you already do. So that's a tool I want you to take away from this webinar, that whenever you're going through a low patch, just think, okay, how's my water level doing? Just even to remember that question, how's my water level doing? What are some of the downward arrows? But also, are there upward arrows I can bring in as supporting my natural antidepressant system?